Today I want to share a story of a young woman betrayed by her own father and the Apache man who risked everything to save her. It's a tale of survival trust, built in silence, and two souls standing against power and lies. If this story touches your heart, please help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Now let's begin their journey. Red Bluff, Colorado Territory, Heathrow, 1878. Dust moved like memory across the canyon, slow and deliberate. It curled under doors, clung to boots, and settled deep into the lungs of men who didn't speak much. Kael Mercer, Apache, by birth and shadow, by necessity, leaned against the post rail outside the Den estate, his arms folded over a chest carved from stone and sweat. He'd been riding the borderlands all morning, tracking a shipment of rifles Judge Thane Holt claimed had been stolen, but Kael knew better. Most of Holt's enemies weren't thieves. They were men like Kael, made desperate by land that had once been theirs. Now in the dying gold light, he returned not to rest, but to stand watch over a home that had never welcomed him. Above him, a lantern swayed gently on the porch beams of the great White House. Music filtered down in fragments, piano notes, laughter, glasses clinking. Tonight was Mae Knox's engagement supper. She was being promised to the mayor's son, a stiff-jawed man with political ambition and calloused palms that had never worked an honest day. Kael wasn't on the guest list. He never was. 9 years he had served the judge, first as a tracker, then a fixer, then something not quite either. His loyalty was currency, his silence insurance. But no matter how many orders he followed, how many border skirmishes he ended before they flared, he remained a half-civilized savage in the judge's ledger. Tolerated, never trusted. He was 17 the first time he saw Mae. She'd been just a girl then, barefoot in the orchard sleeves, rolled up face freckled with sun. Unlike her father, her gaze had been curious, not cruel. Not once did she flinch from him. That alone made her unforgettable. Now she was 24 and still carried that same defiant quiet in her spine. The years had refined her features into something striking, but her eyes held the same trapped intelligence. She stood near the window now, framed by velvet curtains, listening to the man beside her talk. She nodded in all the right places, but Kael could see her smile was hollow. She caught his gaze just once, only a flicker, and something wordless passed between them. He turned before it lingered. Later that night, back in the bunkhouse, Kael stripped off his trail-dirty clothes and washed in a tin basin. The water turned rust-brown, but it wasn't the kind of dirt that came off easy. His muscles ached with the quiet fatigue of someone who lived too much and seized himself. He sat on his cot, bare feet planted on the wooden floor, listening. Far off the party was dying down, horses whinnied. Laughter thinned, then something else, a thud, muffled voices, a scrape. Kael rose, knife in hand. He stepped outside into moonlight. The estate was quiet, too quiet. Then he saw at a servant's door a jar of disturbed dirt, a fresh set of boot tracks, a drag mark. His stomach nodded. He followed the paths printing past the gardens, the orchard down the slope where the trees thinned. At the edge of the lower fields near the ravine, he found a torn scrap of fabric, pale silk lioness. The tracks veered east, 3 horses, maybe 4 moving fast. One unburdened until now. He knew that route. It led to the Badlands. No tones, no law, just dry gulches and men who answered to no one. He ran back to the stables, heart hammering. Ghost! His Mustang sensed it too, eyes wide, breath snorting. Kael saddled fast. No saddlebag, no food, just his rifle knife and the kind of rage that lives cold and deep. He passed the main house on the way out. The judge's study window glowed amber. Inside voices eased. "She's gone," said one. "Taken." A pause. Then the judge let them take her. Silence. "But sir, the mayor, your alliance." "She's not my blood," the judge said flatly. Never was. She's the price, that's all. Kael's blood froze. There it was. The truth in its ugliest form. Mae discarded like a broken deal. He didn't knock. Didn't speak. He rode into the night like a shadow on fire. By dawn, he was deep in the Bluff trails, following hoofprints. Only someone like him could read them. He found a creek bed where the water had pulled around fresh prints, 3 horses, 1 riderless, a set of boot marks, near the edge, 1 smaller than the rest. Someone had stumbled. A broken branch caught on a bit of silk confirmed it. She was still alive. Kael Mercer pressed on the sun rising sharp behind him. As the heat built, so did his focus. He remembered her face, the strong chin, the way her brows furrowed when she read. He remembered how she had once handed him a book he couldn't read and said softly, "You should learn. Your words are worth being written down." No one had ever spoken to him like that before, not even his own people. And now she was taken not for ransom, not for power. No, this was punishment. This was Judge Thane Holt cleaning up the past before it spoke. And Kael knew one thing for sure: he would get her back, even if it meant tearing Red Bluff apart to do it. The sun climbed high and hot over the canyons by the time Kael reached the abandoned mining trail. He'd crossed dry riverbeds and thorny mesquite, tracking their path through shallow ridges and game trails known only to those who'd grown up among the rocks. The signs were clear now. 3 riders, 1 woman taken fast and hard. They'd made no effort to cover their trail. They didn't think anyone would follow. Or maybe they thought no one would dare. Kael crouched beside a hoofprint in the chalky soil. The spacing told him the horses had slowed. Less urgency. They were near wherever they planned to hold up. He scanned the terrain, low brushed by jagged rock walls on either side. Ahead, a narrow break in the cliffs. A blind passage good for ambush or hiding. He left Ghost tethered beneath a bluff and moved forward on foot rifle, across his back blade at his hip. Silence reigned except for the occasional buzz of flies and the distant cry of a hawk. Then he heard it, muted voices echoing faintly from within the stone. Laughter. A grunt. Something dropped. He crept closer. A weathered opening appeared in the rock wall, partially hidden by brush. An old mine shaft, long abandoned, half collapsed but deep enough to conceal men without morals. He eased, close ears straining. Inside, someone cursed. "Hold her still, damn it!" Another voice crueler. "Girl don't have sense to scream no more." Kael's vision narrowed. He counted 2 voices inside. The 3rd man must have gone scouting. Good. He didn't hesitate. He burst through the brush like a storm blade first. The first man never got a hand to his pistol. Kael drove the knife straight under his rib, twisting hard, before the body crumpled. The second stumbled backward, reaching for a shotgun, but Kael was faster. He slammed into him, fists like hammers. A punch to the jaw, then another to the throat. The man gurgled and choked on his own breath. Then silence. Then breathing, shallow, ragged. Kael turned and saw her. Mae Knox lay on the dirt floor, her wrists bound above her head, ankles tied tight. Her dress was torn and stained with blood, her skin pale bruised, but her eyes were open, dazed, afraid. He crossed to her foot. "Mae," he said, voice low. "It's me, Kael." She blinked, trying to speak, but her lips trembled. He knelt, cutting the ropes at her wrists. When he moved to her ankles, he paused, noticing the dark stain between her thighs. His stomach dropped. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice taut. Her eyes welled. "No, not like that," she whispered. "It's just my time." It took Kael a second. Then understanding dawned. Relief swept through him like wind over fire. "Oh," he murmured. "Okay." He didn't blush, didn't look away, just helped her sit up, wrapping her in his coat. Her hands trembled. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said. "I did. That was all. He helped her stand. Her knees buckled. He caught her, lifting her easily into his arms. She buried her face into his shoulder as he carried her out into the light. The sky was blinding after the cave. Her fingers clung weakly to his shirt. They made camp in a narrow arroyo 5 miles from the mine, sheltered between rock spines. Kael Mercer made a fire from dried roots and boiled water. He handed her a tin cup, his coat still wrapped around her. She drank slowly, her lips cracked and pale. "You knew where they'd go?" she asked. "I knew what kind of men they were," he said simply. "This is where I'd hide if I didn't want to be found." She nodded faintly. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, just heavy, like something that had been buried too long. "Why did my father send them?" she asked finally. Kael didn't answer right away. He cleaned his knife with steady hands. "Because you're not part of the plan anymore, he said. "Because you know too much." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "He always hated me," she whispered. "I just never knew how much." Kayla looked up. "He's not your father." Mae blinked. "What?" He set the knife down. "I heard him say it. To the mayor's envoy. Said you weren't his blood. Said he wouldn't pay to bring you back." She stared at him, lips parting. "That's why he wouldn't come," she said. "That's why he looked at me like I reminded him of a lie." Kyle didn't speak. He knew what it was to be looked at like that. She pulled the coat tighter. "I always thought if I was good enough, he'd see me. Like I mattered." Kael met her gaze. "You do matter. Just not to him." Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She was past that. What filled her now was colder. "He'll come after us," she said. "I know." She reached across the fire, her fingers brushing his. "I don't want to go back." "You won't." He said it like a vow. As dusk fell, Kael sharpened his rifle and checked his knife. Mae lay under his blanket watching the stars appear. The warmth of the fire licked her face, but it was his presence nearby that made her feel safe. Not saved. Just not alone. He didn't ask for thanks. Didn't speak of what came next. But as the wind picked up, whispering through the cliffs, they both knew this was just the beginning. Red Bluff wasn't done with them yet. The sun rose slowly behind the sandstone cliffs, casting long orange streaks across the scrubland. It was quiet in the arroyo where Kael and Mae had taken shelter, the kind of quiet that settled only after fear had bled out and fatigue took its place. The air still held a bitter chill, and the fire from the night before had turned to ash. Mae stirred beneath Kael's coat, the pain in her limbs now dull but persistent. When she sat up, her eyes met his across the small camp. He was crouched near the edge of the bluff, scanning the horizon. The rifle rested beside him, hands still but tense. She cleared her throat gently. He turned, stood, and approached. "You all right?" She nodded, wrapping the coat tighter. "Sore, but alive." "You slept," she added. "Not sure if that's a good sign." Kael crouched by the fire pit, adding a few twigs and rekindling the flames. "Means your body's still holding on." "That's enough." Mae watched him silently for a long moment. "You always talk like you've lived 2 lifetimes." "I have," he said, his tone even. By mid-morning they were on horseback, Kael riding ahead, Mae behind him on Ghost. The Mustang moved steadily, used to the weight. Mae held on to him, her fingers digging into his sides for balance. They followed a ridge trail, narrow and winding, that overlooked Red Bluff in the far distance. A tiny cluster of buildings beneath the shadow of a white church steeple. Kael paused at a high outcrop and gestured. "There," he said. "That's where we're going." Mae frowned. "Red Bluff, that's the last place we should—" "Not into town," he said. "To the edge. There's someone there I trust. Mostly." Mae didn't reply, just held on as they rode again. They reached the outskirts of Red Bluff by dusk. keeping to back trails and mesquite thickets. A weathered cabin sat on a hill above town, tucked behind rows of wild oak and an overgrown garden. Smoke curled from the chimney. Kael Mercer dismounted and led Ghost to the side corral. He helped Mae Knox down gently. Inside the cabin, the smell of tobacco and old paper lingered. Maps lined the walls. A stovepipe hissed softly in the corner. "Clyde Dempsey," Kael called. A moment later, a man appeared from a side room, grizzled and sharp-eyed, somewhere in his 60s. He wore suspenders and a holster. His left eye was glass. "Well, damn," he said. "Didn't expect you back, and sure as hell not with her." "She needs a place to rest," Kael said. "Just a day or two." Clyde's gaze narrowed. "You realize who her father is?" Mae stepped forward. "I'm not his daughter, not anymore." Clyde looked at her, then back at Kael. "Trouble?" Kael nodded. "Coming fast." That night, Clyde let them stay in the side room. It smelled of cedar and leather. Mae collapsed onto the cot, exhausted. Kael stayed by the window rifle in his lap. She spoke quietly. "How do you know him?" "Clyde." Kael's voice was low. "He used to ride with the Rangers. Quit after they burned my village. Refused the next commission. Said justice wasn't supposed to wear a badge. And he lost you. He doesn't trust anyone. But he respects truth when he sees it." Mae pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Kael, when you heard them talking about my father, I mean, was he always planning to sell me off?" He turned his gaze out the window. "I don't think he ever saw you as a daughter. Just a ledger item. You were a means to a contract." Mae exhaled sharply and quietly. "I used to pray at that church every week. Believed if I just stayed dutiful, God would make it all make sense." "Maybe that's the problem," Kael murmured. "You were trying to make sense of something built on lies." The next morning, Clyde handed Kael a folded sheet of parchment. "Got this from one of the courthouse clerks. Quiet kid. Owes me." "It's a copy of Holt's land deed updates from last quarter." Kael opened the paper. It listed a series of names. Some crossed out, others newly added. Mae stepped beside him. "My mother's land," she whispered, pointing. "It was supposed to be left untouched in trust." "But it's here," Kael said. "Kissed. Deaned by Jeb Carter." Mae's voice trembled. "She died before he could take it. I remember her saying she left it for me. Her name should be on the deed, not his." Kael scanned the column. "Look at this one. Dated 2 months after she passed. That's impossible." "He forged it," Mae said flatly. "He never owned the land. And if he lied about this, he's lied about more." Clyde muttered. "A man who cuts up the past and repackages it for power. Don't stop at land. You need proof." Mae looked up at Kael. "There's a safe in his study, hidden under the floorboard near the bookshelf. I've seen him go there after late-night meetings." Kael nodded slowly. "We'll go tonight." That evening, cloaked in darkness, they rode back to Holt's estate, keeping off the road. They left the horses tied beneath the ridge and approached on foot, hugging the tall grass line. The house was dim. Most of the staff had been sent away after the engagement party. They entered through the rear servant's door. The study smelled of stale whiskey and gun oil. Kael crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling back the rug and prying up the floorboard. The safe waited beneath old and iron-bowed. "Do you know the code, Dee?" he asked. Mae knelt beside him, fingers trembling. "He used the year he bought the judge's robe. I think 1865. The dial clicked. The latch gave. Inside were stacks of deeds cash and a small black book. Kael flipped it open. Names, payments, signatures, some with a redhead. "This is it," he said. "Everything he's done to buy power. The bribes, the silenced men." "Look at this," Mae Knox whispered, pulling out a folded page. It was a letter, her mother's handwriting. He found it, she said, breath-catching. He kept it to make sure no one else ever knew. Kael Mercer touched her shoulder. Now we do. From outside came the crack of a twig, the gunshot voice. Drop it! Both of you. They turned slowly. The Sheriff Rook Lyle stood in the doorway, revolver raised. I knew you'd come crawling back, girl. Behind him stood 2 deputies, guns drawn. Kael looked at Mae. She didn't blink, and as her fingers slipped into her coat, reaching for the small pistol Kael had given her that morning, he realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. The moment froze. Gunmetal, glinting in lantern light, Mae's fingers tightening around the grip of her pistol, and Kael's weight, shifting ever so slightly as he measured the 3 men across the room. The sheriff. Rook Lyle was no fool. He'd been Holt's hatchet man for over a decade. Too clever for most, and too cruel for the rest. The 2 deputies flanking him, Cole, Ruff Jackson, and Trace Givens, looked like hounds let off a leash. Step away from the safe, Rook growled. You're both under arrest for trespass, theft, and attempted sedition. Sedition, Mae's voice, steady but cold, rang through the room. What law did you dig that one out of, Rook? My father's over the territories. You're not a Dane anymore, sweetheart, Rook sneered. That name was your shield. It's gone now. Kael spoke, then his voice like iron. She's not the one who should be arrested. Rook's eyes narrowed. You just don't know when to shut up, do you, Apache? No more words. Mae moved first. She ducked to the side, pulling the pistol from her coat. The first shot cracked, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Cole, Ruff Jackson, cried out, his arm jerking as the bullet sliced through muscle. Trace Givens lunged forward, but Kael was faster, crossing the room in 3 strides. He grabbed the lamp off the desk and hurled it. Glass shattered. Flame roared. The sheriff stumbled back as oil caught on the curtain fire blooming behind him. Kael slammed into Trace Givens with his shoulder driving him against the bookshelf. Wood splintered. A rain of old law books fell like bricks. Rook fired once, missing Kael by inches. Then Kael was on him, blades drawn in a flash of steel and fury. They wrestled through the smoke, the sheriff howling as Kael's knife cut a deep gash along his ribs. Run! Kael shouted over the crackle of flames, but Mae didn't run. She fired again, hitting Cole in the leg as he tried to rise. Then she turned, grabbed the black book from the desk, and sprinted to Kael's side. Together they burst out the front door into the cold night. Smoke curled from the shattered window behind them as they tore across the front lawn and into the orchard. Ghost waited behind the fence, Hooves' restless eyes wild from the scent of fire. Ghost! Kael barked, helping Mae into the saddle. He mounted behind her just as more shouts rose from the estate. Lanterns flared. Gunshots cracked behind them. A bullet sang past Kael's shoulder, ripping through his coat. He leaned low, spurring Ghost forward. They vanished into the trees, wind slicing their faces. Hooves thundered over dry roots and cracked earth. Behind them, the manor burned a fire started by accident, or her head, or perhaps justice. They didn't stop until dawn, the mesas painted with light. Near the edge of an abandoned ranch, they found a half-collapsed barn hidden between ridges. Mae slid from the saddle, her hands trembling, her face pale with exhaustion. You're bleeding, she said. Kael looked down. Blood soaked his side, seeping from under his coat. Not bad, he muttered. Beat, she ordered. He didn't argue. She tore strips from the lining of her dress and cleaned the wound with whiskey from an old saddle flask. Her hands shook, but she worked with quiet determination. Does it hurt? Yes. Good. He smiled faintly. Once the bleeding slowed, she tied off the bandage and sat back, wiping sweat from her brow. We almost died, but we didn't. She met his gaze. You never hesitated. Back there in the study, he looked away, jaw tight. I knew what we were walking into. Just didn't expect the fire. Mae Knox held up the black book. This changes everything. It proves everything Kael Mercer said. Land theft, bribery, hired killings. He's been laundering everything through church charities and political fronts. She stared down at the names. These men, they've run this town for years. She paused, then looked up. Not anymore. So what now? We expose them, Kael said. But not in Red Bluff, not while they still hold the law. Mae frowned. Then where? There's a circuit judge in Santa Fe, a clean, honest man. I wrote escort for him once. He'll listen if we can get the evidence to him. That's a week's ride. And your wound I'll manage. She reached out fingers, brushing his. You saved me, she said. He met her eyes. I've been saving you for a long time. You just didn't know it. Later that night, as they lay inside the barn, Mae couldn't sleep. The silence pressed down heavy, broken only by the slow rasp of Kael's breathing. She turned to face him. Why do you care? She asked quietly. He opened his eyes. I mean, why me? Why not just walk away when you had the chance? He didn't answer right away. Then because I saw you. What do you mean? The first time. 9 years ago you were sitting in the orchard reading. You looked up at me like I was human. No one else ever did. She exhaled slowly. You think that's love? I don't know, he said. But it was enough to keep me from becoming like them. She reached over, touched his bandaged side. You still might die from this. I've died before. Just not all at once. She smiled faintly. That's a very Apache thing to say. I'm a very Apache man. She leaned close, kissed his forehead, then lay beside him, her hand resting over his. Outside, the wind howled low through the ruins of the ranch. The wolves were coming, but for now, inside the bones of what once was, they had peace. The first 2 days on the trail to Santa Fe were harsh and silent. Kael guided Ghost along dry creek beds and ghost paths through the high desert and always watching the ridge lines for movement. The sun bore down relentless and the wind whipped dust into their eyes until the edges of the world blurred. Mae rode behind him, arms wrapped tight around his waist. Her feet pressed into the space between his shoulder blades. Her grip wasn't fear, it was exhaustion. Every muscle ached, every breath tasted of grit and old smoke. But she never complained. Kael bled through his bandage by the second night. They stopped at an old sheep herder's cabin, tucked inside a craggy veil of pinyon pines. The roof had half collapsed, but the stones still held warmth and the broken hearth took to fire. As Mae stoked the flames, Kael collapsed onto the floor, sweat pouring down his temples. You're burning up, she murmured, fingers pressed to his cheek. I've had worse. That's not an answer. She boiled water, tore more cloth from her underdress, and did what she could to clean the wound. It had reopened during the ride, red and angry. She ground dried sage from Kael's pouch, made a bitter poultice, and pressed it to the skin. He didn't flinch, but his jaw clenched hard. I don't want you to die before we get there, she said. You didn't used to care. She looked up sharply. That's not fair. His eyes softened. I know. They sat in silence for a while, the crackle of fire between them. Outside winds slid through the pines like whispered warnings. You think they're close? Mae asked. Kael nodded. If not now, then soon. Sheriff Rook Lyle is too proud to stop chasing. And your father. He's too afraid of the truth getting out. Mae clutched the black book to her chest. I still remember thinking I'd marry into safety, she said quietly. That's what my father promised. But every man at that party looked at me like a business ledger. Kael Mercer's voice came low. You deserve better than promises made by men with knives behind their backs. Mae Knox stared into the flames. Do you believe people can change, Kael? He thought about it a long time. No, he said at last. But I believe they can choose who they become next. They rode again at dawn. Kael's fever broke during the night, and though the pain still gnawed at his side, he sat straighter in the saddle. Mae's pistol rested at her hip now, not hidden, not for show. They crossed into New Mexico territory by mid-morning, the terrain widened, stretching flat in places, then folding into red hills and arroyos. The road to Santa Fe curved through hard country, scattered pueblos, old missions, and canyons that swallowed light. At midday on the third day they found trouble. The riders came fast. 4 of them, faces masked, guns drawn, hired men, not lawmen, mercenaries. One raised a rifle and fired a warning shot. Dust kicked up inches from Ghost's hooves. Kael turned hard, forcing the Mustang up into the rocks. They dismounted behind a low rise, took cover between sandstone ledges. Mae dropped beside him, panting. They followed us. They're not lawmen, Kael muttered. They don't care if they shoot first. Gunfire cracked overhead. Mae covered her head. Then she reached for her pistol. Kael's eyes flicked to her. You know how to shoot? No, she said, but I know how to aim. He passed her the spare rifle from his saddlebag and whispered instructions. Wait for my signal. Don't shoot unless they close in. He crawled along the ridge, circling wide, ghosting through brush and rock. 2 of the gunmen advanced recklessly, overconfident. One lit a cigar as he moved, grinning like a dog who thought the fight was already won. He never saw Kael. One swift blow to the throat, a knife through the kidney. The other man turned at the sound, only to take a rock full in the face. Then Kael's fist broke his jaw. Both collapsed without firing again. Gunfire echoed as the last 2 advanced on Mae's position. She waited, then rose. The rifle cracked. One man tumbled backward, his shoulder shredded. The last turned to run, but Kael dropped him from behind with a clean shot through the calf. The man screamed, then whimpered into unconsciousness. Kael returned to Mae's side, breathing hard. She lowered the rifle. I only meant to scare him. You did. He glanced at the wounded man. But you can't keep thinking fear is enough. Mae looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. Then I'll learn. That night they camped in a dry canyon surrounded by rock spires. The stars stretched clear and endless overhead, and the moon was thin, sharp like a blade. Kael sat sharpening his knife while Mae read through more of the black book. She looked up. There's a name here I recognize. Judge Amos Gage. My father always said he was incorruptible. Then maybe he's the one we need. She nodded. He lives outside Santa Fe. A day's ride from the capital. Kael tied off his blade. Then that's where we go. She closed the book. I don't want to just hand this off. I want to testify. I want people to hear it from me. You sure I'm tired of being someone they speak over, or use, or sell? He looked at her, really looked. You're not the girl I carried out of that cave. She reached out, touched his arm. You're not the man who stood in shadows either. He covered her hand with his. They didn't kiss, not yet. But something in them, shifted, rooted, grew deeper than need or rescue. It wasn't just love blooming, it was loyalty. Respect and pain shared like a burden made lighter. They reached Judge Amos Gage's homestead at dusk the next evening. A ranch house, built from adobe and stone, sat beside an old cottonwood grove. No guards, no servants. Just a man with silver hair and tired eyes, sitting on a porch with a journal in his lap. Judge Amos Gage, Mae Knox called as she dismounted. The old man looked up, his eyes narrowed. You're Dan's girl, he said. She walked forward, book in hand. Not anymore. Behind her, Kael Mercer stayed mounted, watching the horizon. We need 10 minutes, she said. That's all. The judge took the book, read a few pages, and didn't look up for a long time. The morning sky over Santa Fe was a wash of pale gold, streaked with slate blue where night still clung. In the courtyard of Judge Gage's adobe estate, The cicadas were quiet, and so were the people. Kael stood near the arched gate, rifle in hand, his eyes tracking every rider who passed the distant road. The town below was waking, so was the danger. Inside, Mae sat across from the judge at a heavy oak table. The black book lay between them, opened wide. Judge Gage had been reading for hours. Every page turned with the gravity of law. "I knew Holt was ambitious," Gage said finally. "But this is beyond ambition. This is treason." Mae's hands were folded tight in her lap. "Can you bring it to court?" "I can," he said, "but it won't be clean." He's paid off. Half the circuit has friends in the territorial office. Even in Santa Fe, I'll be fighting a stacked deck. "I'll testify," she said quietly. "I'll name every man, every deal, every false contract he ever waved under my nose." Gage looked at her long and hard. "You understand what you're walking into?" "I do now." He nodded once. "Then we ride at dusk, quietly. I'll have you both under protection until the hearing." She exhaled, shoulders finally easing. Kael entered, closing the door behind him. "They're here." "Who?" Mae asked. "Rook Lyle and 4 riders. Saw them passing through the southern ridge. They're following the scent." Judge Gage stood. "I'll call for federal marshals." "You won't have time," Kael said. "They'll move before dusk." The judge looked at them both. "Then we hold them off long enough to ride." That afternoon passed like a slow drag of thunder across a clear sky. Judge Gage armed 2 of his ranch hands and barricaded the front gate. Mae helped pack the pages of evidence into a canvas satchel while Kael checked the ammunition and oiled the rifles. "I thought it would feel more triumphant," Mae said as she loaded bullets with shaking fingers. "Justice never does," Kael replied. "It's just a quieter kind of violence." She turned to him, eyes searching. "You think we'll survive this?" "I think we've already survived worse." She nodded, and for a moment that was enough. At twilight they heard the hooves, not galloping, stalking. 5 riders moving through the brush below the property line. Kael watched from the stable's second window, tracing their shadows like predators circling a barn. "They're waiting for darkness," he said. "Then we move first." Judge Gage muttered, handing Kael a Winchester. "If they want blood, they'll find mine won't come easy." Mae moved behind Kael, strapping her pistol to her hip. "I'm not hiding." He turned to her. "You should." "No. If this is the end, I want to face it on my feet." He stared at her, jaw tight. "Then don't hesitate." "I won't." The first shot came just as the sun dipped behind the hills. One of Rook's men, perched behind a mesquite tree, fired toward the house. The bullet buried itself in the adobe wall beside the door. Kael returned fire, dropping the shooter with a clean shot to the shoulder. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted from both flanks. Dust clouded the air. A second man rushed toward the fence, but Gage's ranch hand cut him down before he made it. Inside the gate, Mae crouched, low, pistol drawn, breath fast but focused. Rook charged with another rider aiming for the side entrance. Kael met him head-on, diving from the stable roof in a blur of buckskin and steel. He knocked the second man from his horse, then turned to face Rook. The sheriff raised his pistol. "You should have stayed on your damn reservation," he spat. "I never had one," Kael Mercer said. The 2 men lunged. They fought like animals, punches, elbows, blood. Kael's side wound split open again, but he didn't fall. He ducked a wild swing, slammed his forearm into Rook Lyle's throat, and drove them both to the ground. The pistol skidded across the dirt. Mae Knox ran toward it, scooping it up, just as Rook rose behind Kael, blood dripping from his mouth. Eyes wild. He reached for his knife and froze. Mae stood 5 feet away, pistol aimed at his chest. "Don't," she said. Rook hesitated. Then he lunged anyway. The shot echoed like a final breath. Rook dropped to his knees, surprise etched across his face, then collapsed forward into the dust. Violence returned like a falling curtain. The surviving riders fled. The ground was littered with bullet casings, footprints, and blood. Mae dropped the pistol, hands shaking. Kael caught her before she hit the ground. "I didn't want to," she whispered. "But you did what you had to." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "Does that make me like them?" "No," he said. "It makes you free." 3 days later, they stood before the territorial court in Santa Fe. Judge Amos Gage presented the evidence. Mae read her statement with a steady voice, naming every man, every crime, and her own father as the architect of the corruption. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Within a week, warrants were issued, assets frozen, the Thane estate seized. Mae refused to attend the sentencing. Kael waited outside the courthouse, leaning against a pillar in the morning sun. When she stepped out, she didn't speak, just wrapped her arms around his chest and held tight. "What now?" he asked. "We go," she whispered. "Where?" "Anywhere. The road's long and the past can't catch us." They left that night. No ceremony, no goodbye. Just a man and a woman, saddlebags full of truth and blood, still drying on their memories. They rode west past the mountains and rivers, chasing a kind of peace no law could grant. And as the stars wheeled above, Kael reached for her hand. Mae didn't let go. They rode south until the land changed again, until the tall pines gave way to mesquite and brittle brush. The stars at night hung lower, larger, as if daring them to dream. Somewhere past lost crossroads, they traded ghost for 2 sturdy horses, no names, just hooves and heat, and kept riding until their past no longer whispered behind them. In a small valley outside a border town called Socorro del Norte, they founded a shack half swallowed by dust, a stream that hadn't dried up, and a grove of cottonwoods that turned silver in the moonlight. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. The first few weeks were hard, the kind of hard that didn't make the stories. They built a shelter with hands still calloused from fight. Kael hunted and trapped, teaching Mae how to skin a rabbit, how to move without breaking silence. She worked the soil-dug trenches for beans and bitter greens and learned to build a fire from flint and bark instead of matches. They rarely spoke of Red Bluff or the blood or the trial that turned her father's name to ash. But in the quiet moments when Mae stirred cornbread over a smoking pot or Kael mended his coat in the last of the daylight, they would sometimes meet eyes, and that look said everything. They had survived, and not just the danger, but the rot. The rot that lived in them too, in the wounds and doubts and what-ifs. Mae once asked as they watched smoke curl from the chimney into dusk, "Do you think we'll ever be good again?" Kael had looked at her for a long moment. "We were never bad," he said. "Just broken." One morning, they woke to distant hoofbeats. Not fast, not aggressive, just one rider. Kael rose, rifle slung low, and stood in the doorway. A U.S. Marshal approached, coat, dusty hat tilted low. He dismounted slowly and tipped his hat. "Morning," he said. Kael didn't speak. The Marshal Dacaz glanced past him, saw Mae in the cabin's shadow. "I come with news, not trouble," the Marshal said. "Judge Amos Gage wanted me to find you. Thought you should know." Mae stepped forward. "Know what?" The Marshal pulled a paper from his coat, and an official notice signed and sealed. "Thane died. Took a knife in territorial prison. Said nothing even at the end." The U.S. Marshal looked between them. "No will, no heirs. Estate's been dissolved. Most funds redistributed to reparations and land claims." Mae Knox didn't move. Her face gave nothing away. "That's all I had to bring. Good day to you both." He rode off without waiting for thanks. Only after the dust settled did Mae speak. "I don't feel anything." "You're not supposed to," Kael Mercer said gently. "That's what grief is, when it's used up." That night she sat beneath the cottonwood with her arms wrapped around her knees. The wind picked through the branches. A fire cracked nearby. He hated me because I reminded him of her, she whispered. Kael sat beside her, his shoulder warm against hers. But I don't remember her face. I only remember how cold his was. He didn't try to fix it, just waited. You think a life like this is enough? She asked. Out here, hiding, living in inches instead of miles. He didn't hesitate. It's not hiding, he said. It's choosing. She looked at him, eyes tired but alive. I used to think I was meant for something big, something public, important. You were. But now he took her hand, calloused, warm alive. Now you're here, still standing. That's important too. Guess over the next months the cabin turned into a home. The land gave more than it took. Chickens eventually. 2 goats. Kael built a corral from deadwood. Mae sewed curtains from old flour sacks. And once a month they rode to town for supplies where no one asked questions because they didn't need to. Every now and then, people stopped by. Travelers, drifters, ex-soldiers, women with no name. Some stayed a night. Some too. All were fed. Some were healed. One girl, no more than 16, arrived bleeding and barefoot. Mae washed her feet herself. Kael offered her a cot in the lean-to. The girl left 2 days later. Said nothing, but left behind a silver earring and a bundle of wildflowers. Mae pinned the flowers above the hearth. We're building a church, she joked once. Kael just smiled. Not the kind you kneel in. Then came the baby. Not theirs. A basket left by the door at dawn, wrapped in homespun in an old army coat. No note, just a quiet whimper. Mae stared at the child for a long time, then lifted it into her arms. She never asked who the mother was, or where she'd gone. She just fed the baby goat's milk from a cloth and held her through the night. They named her Juna. By spring the scars faded some, not gone, but not open anymore. Mae planted flowers near the creek, wild lupines, bright and defiant. Kael made a cradle from cottonwood carved smooth with gentle hands. One night, under a sky filled with stars and coyotes, howling far off, they sat outside with Juna sleeping between them. She'll never know what we came from, Mae said. She doesn't need to. Mae smiled. I hope she grows wild. She will, but not lost. They watched the fire until it died down to coals. Then Kael looked at her, voice low. I never told you. What when I first saw you? You were reading under the orchard tree. Red dress dirt on your knees. I remember the dress, she said softly. I didn't know you were watching. I always was. She took his hand, and this time they did kiss. Not because the story told them to, but because the silence between them had finally softened enough to hold it. And somewhere in that quiet stretch of high desert where law had failed and truth had once burned, 2 people carved a different kind of justice, not with bullets, sermons, or power, but with presence, with staying with fire that didn't burn everything down, only enough to make room for something better. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this one. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.